Okay, well, good morning. First of all, I am not Terry McKnight, and he's snowbound. I'm Rick White. I'm the vice chair for this year's ASNE Day and next year's chairman. Thanks to all of you for withering the storm. Psychologically, when you wake up and you don't see snow, you say, hey, I'm going to work. Hopefully you haven't been topside lately, because I guess it's getting a little stinky. What we've been able to do, though, is resurrect or cobble together a panel. The snow has kept some of the original panelists in your agenda out of here. Affordability has been a constant theme throughout this ASNE Day so far, and those of you that were here this morning for Secretary Kendall's comments know it better than anybody else. This theme goes across industry, government, it goes across the service industry, it goes across the commodity industry, it crosses ships, systems, services, margins for those of us in industry. Although the government doesn't care about margins, yeah, they really do, because that affects cost. We talk about should cost, does cost, might cost, will cost, did cost. And all of those transcend every bit and every corner of what we do for a living. So we are on somewhat of a time schedule. A couple of our panelists do need to depart. Their schedule is changing. So without any further ado, let me start at the far end and just kind of introduce the panel briefly. My intent here is to introduce them, and then I'll open it up, let each panelist have a few comments. And again, I'll go from your right to my left, and then we'll open it up to the audience for question. At the far end is Admiral Dave Johnson, PEO Subs. Next to him is Mr. Will Lennon, the Vice President for Engineering and Design Programs at General Dynamics Electric Boat. Next to him is retired Rear Admiral Clark Orzali, a former engineering duty officer, now with Dassault Systems, with a long and distinguished career in maintenance. Next to him is Admiral retired Tony Langrick. He's our duty Tron on the panel, currently working for CACI. Right next to him is Admiral retired Ron Robigo, formerly of the USS Coast Guard, currently a free agent in the job market. And right next to him is Rear Admiral Bruce Bafford, currently the Chief Acquisition Officer at the Coast Guard, who is trying to follow Admiral Robigo's tracks. So I think the panelists, as we've cobbled them together, certainly represents the totality of the industry that we're trying to address in the affordability issue. And the Coast Guard, I know Admiral Bafford and I were just talking, really has a prime example of the affordability program, and hopefully he'll hit on that. So without any further ado, Admiral Johnson.
All right, thank you, Rick. Good morning, and thanks for inviting me to be in this panel today. I do strongly believe in the title that affordability indeed is the key to our shipbuilding future. Without affordability, we, the providers, will never succeed in delivering the capability and the capacity necessary to execute the nation's defense strategy. No matter the need, unaffordable platforms simply won't deliver. Now, Ron O'Rourke, he's a SAGE analyst. Many of you in this room may know him from the Congressional Research Service. He noted in a very good report, in a statement he made before the House Armed Services Committee on Case Studies in DoD Acquisition. He did this back in June of 2014. And the title was Finding What Works. There are lessons learned for Navy shipbuilding. So there'll be no surprise in this audience at the 7 that Ron pulled out. One is get the requirements right, up front. Manage risk by not trying to do too much in the program and perhaps seek a 70 to 80% solution. Second, impose cost discipline up front. Use realistic price estimates. 3, have a high design completed construction start. 4, use appropriate contract type for the risk. 5, properly supervise the construction work, and that highlights the critical role of our supervisors of shipbuilding. 6, provide stability for industry using multi-year contracts or block buy contracting. And then the last, and maintain a capable government acquisition workforce that understands what it is buying. And it's a point that Secretary Kendall highlighted in his Better Buying Power 3.0, and at this point, I want to emphasize is what I think is the most important element of affordability, and I'd like to provide you an illustration. At the Submarine Institute of Australia's conference last November in Fremantle in their summer, weather was light years different than what you have outside today, I stressed this point for their future submarine program, and I said Peer-to-peer technical knowledge between the government and the submarine design and build partner is a first-order influence on cost, both acquisition and sustainment. The U.S. Navy has maintained a technical and program competence within the government to design, develop, build, sustain, and modernize its submarine force. I contend that the highly complex business of submarine design, build, and sustainment demands this level of peer-to-peer competence. The Virginia cost reduction program for ships 11 and on was only possible because the government and the industry team had designed the product, understood the technical design basis, and could make informed choices to effect the necessary changes that reduced the ship's cost and improved its capability. The continuity from SSGN's design and her large payload tubes enabled incorporating the Virginia payload tubes in the ship's redesigned bow with confidence. The detailed system-level understanding of Virginia enabled removal of systems without any degrade to capability. It all worked simply because we had the understanding and the knowledge base to act upon. That is what an informed, competent government industry team can do and make our programs affordable. And I'll use one other example, Ohio replacement, as an illustration from Ron O'Rourke's lessons and impact on affordability. The director for the Ohio replacement, Jack Evans, his team were pushing all the areas to drive down costs in engineering and design, in construction, and in life cycle. A tough problem that will require the Navy and our industry partners' best efforts. We began with a simple design philosophy: credible capability at the lowest possible cost. That philosophy guided our efforts while moving through the cost, capability, and technical achievability trades. We reduced the ship's capability to the minimum necessary to meet the strategic deterrence mission credibly. An extensive effort that took well over 2 years to get to the requirement set and ship pricing we have today. We codified the requirements in a Navy-approved CDD, establishing the right requirements to focus the design team on the right work and control cost. That guidance was incorporated into the ship specifications, which were signed last April. The CDD gave the acquisition community a solid basis for affordably executing the research and development, prototyping, design development, and design disclosure products for ship construction. Now, this ship is a blend of reuse, like Trident II and D5 Life Extended Strategic Weapons System, and innovation, where we need to either adapt systems or components, like the propulsor, or design new, like electric drive, to meet our challenging requirements. We're pushing the envelope on design complete at construction start. We must be better than 80% to achieve the challenging 84-month build and deliver in 2028, leaving us 3 years to test, certify, and finish construction before that ship heads to Bangor or Kings Bay for strategic onload and first patrol in 2031. We also have a highly constrained problem, with OSD mandated affordability targets for both construction, $4.9 billion in 2010 dollars, and O&S. Now, inside the Navy, we have targets for the non-recurring engineering that provides a design that leads to predictable, stable construction of 12 ships in 52 years of cost-effective life cycle support for the class. We're through 3 extensive cost estimates and have lowered our construction costs from $5.6 billion at Milestone A in 2010 to $5.2 billion today. That is in 2010 dollars, and that is the average cost of the ships 2 through 12. Having a detailed and credible cost estimate enables informed choices to stay within affordability targets. So in summary, a capable, competent government acquisition force working with a capable, competent ship designer and builder is a first-order effector on affordability. That team can do the right trades, set the right capability, build a credible plan, negotiate the right contract, fair, with the right incentives, and lead to affordable platforms delivered on schedule and mission ready. That's an essential key to an affordable shipbuilding future. Thank you. Now I set you up, Will.
Good morning. I'm Will Lennon from Electric Boat. I feel like back when I was a kid And I'm 6'4", so it was not unusual to be walking down the street and someone yell, "Hey kid, you want to go play on basketball?" And you'd have a pickup game. Well, this panel's kind of a pickup game. So today I'm sitting on the phone and telling my wife that I'm at a ASNE conference and dealing with a lot of Navy people, and she starts telling me that the guy who wants to plow our driveway wants a lot of money because we're getting the 5th snowstorm in about 2 weeks. And I said, well, that's just totally unaffordable. We can't do that. And so some guy comes up and taps me on the back and says, "Hey kid, want to be on a panel?" So seriously, I'd like to just build on Dave's remarks relative to affordability and how important it is for both the Navy, the industry, and ultimately the taxpayers. And I'll build on my experience and Electric Boat's experience relative to the Virginia program, and then the Virginia development into the Block 3 contract, and then the Ohio replacement program. And I'll try to put my context in 3 areas. One is what we describe as establishing a technical baseline for the ship, which will define the ship itself and lock in a majority of the cost. The next opportunity we have is in the design build area, where we actually develop the detailed design, and what we'd like to have as a deliverable of that is a construction-ready design product. The next thing you need is a ship authorization to go start building the ship. And then the last is in the contracting area. So in the technical baseline, we look at a couple of different things. Dave mentioned them earlier. What are the platform capabilities and requirements? That is absolutely instrumental and key to set those early, because at that point, the shipbuilders will start doing baseline ship arrangements and a manufacturing assembly plan. And those 2 things have to come together at the conclusion of the preliminary design so that we all know what requirements we're trying to meet, what the ship will look like, and how we're going to build it. The third piece of that is to design the next level down, the system level, and the design technical requirements for which you're going to design and build the ship. That technical baseline is very important, and it establishes over 80% of the cost being locked in at that point. The next area is the design build process on Ohio replacement. It's referred to as the design build sustain because the life cycle support costs are very important to that platform as well. One of the key underpinnings to the design build process is the ability to invest in areas that will save you money. We call it the Design for Affordability program. We designated money up front to look at technologies, whether it was to make the ship cheaper or to help the shipyard be cheaper. In the case of Ohio replacement, we're investing heavily in the life cycle support reduction areas, increased shaft light, a commercial radar, or all areas where it will benefit the ship either in acquisition or in life cycle savings. In the shipyard, we're looking at state-of-the-art market equipment, tooling, and processes to help us build the ship easier. A lot of efforts going on that in steel plate processing, light metal fabrication, and pipe fabrication. Once you have a DFA program, you've taken a swing across industry to see what is the art of the possible to reduce the ship cost through technology development. We then try to work through a DFP program, Design for Production, understanding what the state of the market is in the shipyards, how to most affordably build a ship. We make the design meet those requirements. Then we get into the design build. The design part of the design build looks at the arrangement development effort, how you develop that 3D product model. It's got to be producible from a shipyard perspective to be affordable. It also has to meet the Navy's requirements for operability and maintainability, but the true driver for us is it's got to be producible. The disclosures that we develop to turn over to the shipbuilders have to be timely to support that high degree of design completion. They have to be high quality, they've got to be simplified, and they've got to be electronic. We've got to get past paper and deliver electronic deliverables down into the shipyard so that they can efficiently build the ships. The build part of design build starts with an integrated master schedule. Every design deliverable required to build that ship has to be driven from that schedule. Tailored work instructions to the mechanics. We're developing the next generation of mechanics in our shipyards today, and we've got to do a better job of giving them simplified, tailored instruction that describe the work that they're going down to do for that day. Manufacturing fixtures and procedures required to build the ship have to be developed as part of the design process, as well as the test plans and the material procurement feeds. Lastly, I'd like to just talk about the contracting strategy. Multi-year contracting provides stability to the shipyards and the vendor base, promotes capital investments across the industrial base to draw down the cost on a line of ships. AP and EOQ funding maximizes the economic leverage we can get to buy material upfront for the committed number of ships. And we're also starting to think of some out-of-the-box concepts and strategies for Ohio replacement. If the nation's committed to build 12 of these ships, how can we maximize our savings? Can we do multi-program material procurement? Group the Ohio replacement with the Virginia block buy construction contracts and buy all the material up front to maximize our savings? Can we do advanced construction so that we know how to build certain areas? If we're going to build 241 missile tubes for the Ohio replacement, let's start a production line, keep the competition going to maximize our value and reduce the cost as quickly as we can. So those are my major points for affordability on the Navy programs.
So I'm here because I got a text at 6:30, actually 6:29 this morning, saying, could you sit a panel? And I responded yes, and then I said, what's it about? As Rick mentioned, I have some history in the maintenance side. I actually did a little bit of construction, not as a constructor, but as a member of the ship's crew, and the tall gentleman to my left was my chief test engineer when I was new construction engineer last century. How's that, Willie? But I do have some perspective on affordability. If you look at the total life cycle cost of any weapon system, and depending on, there is some variability depending on level of complexity, but it's a total life cycle cost, in many cases, about 80% of the cost of the platform is after delivery. So, and being a maintainer by trade, I had command of the shipyard in Bremerton where we did overhaul and repair of nuclear-powered submarines and carriers. Whatever we got produced in the acquisition process, we had to sustain. And in many cases, what might be efficient or least cost in the acquisition doesn't necessarily make it easy to sustain in the life cycle. I followed that tour with a tour on the OpNav staff, and I'm glad to say that there have been changes in the process since then. I remember going to a pre-decision acquisition board meeting, and I went to the meeting, I was not invited. I was a sustainment guy. I wasn't supposed to be in the room. I sat on a back bench and stood up and asked when we talked about what it was going to cost to sustain the platform in its life cycle, such as when would we discuss whether we would put high solids paints into ballast tanks or other tanks on board the ship. And the program manager stood up and said, that's not my problem, that's someone else's problem. That mentality has changed. I'm glad to see that Admiral Johnson has a key system attribute of total ownership or life cycle operations and support cost. But that's not an easy thing to do. As the American Society of Naval Engineers, we need to engineer that from the beginning. And that's a systems engineering perspective. That's not just the nuts and bolts. That's not just getting the shaft to last longer between docking periods. That's integrating the operations. How are we going to operate the ship? That is integrating the modernization. How is that pre-programmed in the life cycle? That's integrating the manning. Not only have the right people and the right numbers with the right skill sets, but how they're assigned and distributed. So to me, if we don't do that engineering up front to ensure that we know what those total ownership costs are going to be. We're going to get what we get. And so my thought is we need to have a systems engineering approach to determine total ownership cost before we start, and then we have an opportunity for success. Otherwise, we'll just get what we get. Thanks.
So I have a confession to make. When Rick called me, or we bumped into each other about 6:25, he said, "Would you be on a panel?" And I said, "Sure, what's it about?" And then he said, "Well, who else can we get?" And I thought, well, I'd seen Clark here, and I'd seen Ron here. Maybe they'd be willing to. So you got a phone call because we were thinking in the dark over here. So let me think back to what Sean Stackley said early on. Early inventors start with something and to invent something is a complex process, and you invent whatever it is, and it is lots of gears, wires, whatever you want to call it. It's complex in its design. It's not elegant, and over time it becomes a very simple design. It keeps improving the simplicity of the design, the complexity of the design, and I want to talk a little bit on that theme in an IT world. And so let me frame the question for you. When does information technology become affordable? The early question you get, and I'll back that up, I spent 5 years doing business development for Oracle, and so I might have learned a thing or two about information technology and selling it. Remember, we're talking about IT, not capability is easy to come by in the ones or twos. We all carry very capable cell phones. We've all heard those stories. But when you start to scale it to hundreds of devices or hundreds of capabilities or thousands, the numbers become pretty significantly large. So it's not a surprise to me, and I think it's rather a good thing that we think about IT in the context of an affordable, sometimes an ACAT 1 system, because it's the quantities that start to matter. If I think about my history with information systems, I'll break those in two categories, software and hardware. And perhaps even in the business of hardware, you can put a lot of software in there. And I see Greg Blackburn from Oracle back there scared. He's looking at me going, "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" There's a lot of capability that gets developed in the hardware world. And if you look at what we do in the warfare centers, where people are very innovative and desire to be on the cutting edge, we go create the edge, because the first thing that happens is you get an idea. You read a book, it says this is possible, and people of our ilk who are engineers get an idea and they say, well, I can go build that. And we spend a lot of time building it because no one else has built it. And then suddenly it becomes an enthusiasm that says, we can go put that in the Navy and we can sustain it, or we can put it in the Army. And just about the time we do that, industry comes to the table and says, guess what I'm mass producing? And it's the first of the article, so it's a little scary to us. So we'll keep going on inventing the thing while industry is out here producing it ready for a mass market. And just about the time we get the program ready, industry comes to us and says, it's a commodity. And it takes us 4 or 5 years to back out of the mentality that I need to build it and own it myself. I can just go buy it, or I can install it, or the next iteration, to Marv Langston's point, I've got a box this big, it's got a bunch of 6U slots in it, I only need to fill 2 of those slots where I used to have to fill 8 of them. But we've still got an enthusiasm for the build it, own it, operate it ourselves part. It was built out of the enthusiasm for I've got a great idea, I'm a good engineer, I'm an innovator, I want to be ahead of the curve. And my thought that I'd like to have a conversation about as we go into the questions is, at what point does it become affordable? And it isn't, in my mind, at the early edge. It's affordable when it's a commodity. And so when we think about when do we adopt IT and scale, and how do you make the transition out of the I have to own it, I have to invent it, I have to maintain it, to the it's a commodity, let's get out of that mode, let's just go buy it, is to me, in the information world, the ultimate question about affordability. It isn't about capability anymore. You get that pretty easily. It's when does it become affordable at scale, in numbers, and at that point it's a commodity, and walking away from the ownership part of it. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to my compadre Ron.
Good morning. Yesterday at the Global Shipbuilding Summit, we talked about affordability, and it kind of got my creative juices going in the sense of thinking about it in perhaps maybe a little slightly different way than we have in the past. I kind of group it really comes down to requirements, but not in the way that perhaps we traditionally think about requirements. I would offer that there's maybe 3 groups of requirements that we pay attention to, and it's the last group I'll talk about just very briefly. The first is the requirements for the sea frame, and that's things like its size, its seakeeping, its speed, those fundamental things that'll probably never change over the life of the ship itself. Now those you've got to make sure that your other requirements contribute and make sure that you get that part of it exactly correct, because you can't change that sort of stuff later on. The next piece is the kind of payload or the systems that enable you to do mission. And that's an area I think of a great opportunity in terms of long-term affordability, if you think about those in the right way. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's kind of all the other requirements that support systems and capabilities that really support the first 2, that keep the sea frame operating, as well as obviously supporting that payload or those systems that do mission. And in that category, it could be electrical power systems, whatever kinds of other support systems are in place, habitability, et cetera. And I would tell you that there's another requirement in that grouping that I think we could pay more attention to, and we talked a little bit about it yesterday, and that is the idea that you need an adaptable, flexible platform to be able to adjust to those things that you just don't know. And I would tell you that if you build in that flexibility, and that might be margins for certain capabilities, so you have the ability to make some changes, and those things you can make changes, especially in regards to payload. You do things like you provide accessibility to those systems so that when you go into a maintenance period, you're not ripping the ship apart to do kind of routine, regular maintenance, or even upgrades for technology. And that could be everything, the way you run the wiring, the way you have access to particular spaces that have not only payload or combat or other mission systems, but also those systems that support your mission systems. And if you think about it in that way, you really want to put that flexibility in from the beginning and make flexibility or adaptability and the accompanying margins, and that could be volume, it could be power, it could be cooling, it could be IT capability. You leave those things there for what you don't know. And I would tell you that if you do that and you think about it as a flexible platform, it kind of goes to things that we already know, which is that we don't know everything. And technology is moving way quicker than we can even design and build the ship. And that certainly is going to eclipse the life of the ship, where you're planning for 40 years. You don't know what you're going to need in 40 years, both from emission systems and also the environment that the platform operates in. And so how do you do that? Well, you lock down those requirements as early as possible for those things you know that you don't need a lot of change on. You also establish an organization that can talk about requirements. And instead of always leaning for the bleeding edge of those technologies and capabilities and changing it as you go through, nothing is worse for a program than changing midstream as you're building and designing. Lock those things down early, and you can do that because you can turn to the requirements folks and say, hey, guess what? If we got this a little wrong or you need the next revision on the technology, we've designed it so we can do it affordably. You don't have to wait to the midlife to get something done. So how do you do that? Well, you construct an organization that manages the acquisition from the idea of when you first think about it, the conceptual all the way through the building, and then obviously as it enters into its life cycle. And you build an organization that builds trust, that educates, and brings all the players in the room. Clark talked about being a maintenance guy in the room on an acquisition decision. My goodness, absolutely, you got to be in the room. And I would tell you that there's others that need to be there as well. You need to have the budget folks. God forbid they should be there, but they absolutely have to be. Public affairs, the people that are going to talk about this to the overseers and to the public, the people you're going to try to gain their support on to be able to have your program move forward. Personnel, ships operated by people. Those folks should be in there. Now again, they may not come out on every aspect, but they got to be there. And of course, your capabilities and requirements folks have to be there as well. And what you end up doing is you build a consensus, you educate the entire community so you don't have folks coming in afterwards and saying, oh, I never agreed to that. And you end up with an organization that has trust with each other and can deliver a platform that isn't being ripped apart as it goes through the cycle in terms of massive change, which is what costs and really attacks your affordability. And in the end, I would tell you that this is the best way to control life cycle costs, because when you come to do the maintenance that you know you're going to do, those changes that are inevitable, you now have a platform you can do it cost effectively. And nobody has to fall on their sword, because if you don't get that capability in, the platform's locked in. So that flexibility, that trust, and that collaborative organization allows you then to operate that ship in the long term with good life cycle costs. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning. I'm Bruce Bapper. I'm the Coast Guard's Chief Acquisition Officer, and it's my pleasure to be here. And this is a pickup team, and I was the kid on the bench going, "Ooh, put me in, coach, put me in, coach." I really appreciate the opportunity to sit on this because, as most of you know, the Coast Guard's halfway through a major recapitalization of all of our surface assets, primarily our national security cutter, our fast response cutters, and our offshore patrol cutters. And we're doing that right now in a declining budget environment. Our ASNE budget has dropped 40% in the last 4 years, and this year in FY16 coming up, it's dropped 26% in this year alone. And we're doing that against the backdrop of trying to get our offshore patrol cutter, which is the largest acquisition in DHS. It's the largest acquisition in Coast Guard history. It's a 25-ship procurement out the door, and we need to do that because the ships it's replacing have just started turning 50 years old, and our 210s are going to start decommissioning very soon here, whether we want them to or not. But we need that offshore capability. So everything we're doing right now is about affordability. So this panel couldn't be more appropriate to what we're doing right now in acquisitions. Right now, if you look at Coast Guard acquisitions, now that we got a budget a couple days ago in DHS, we'll be putting NSC 8 on contract as soon as it gets a portion through OMB, which completes that program of record. That was the original program of record, 8 cutters. It's our flagship cutter. They're the most expensive cutter we have ever procured. It's a game changer for the Coast Guard, but we're going to complete that whole program of record from its original POR, which is really a rare event in Washington these days. We're quite proud of that, of being able to get all 8 ships done. And the only reason we've been able to do that is because we've gotten to annual production cycles. We've got efficiency in production. HI has done a great job going down the learning curve. We've got 4 delivered, 3 underway out in the fleet right now. The 4th just delivered on time. It was about $25 million below target. When you have that kind of cost performance, that's how you get the whole program of record funded and done. And with annual cycles and the annual build cycles, they're able to go down that learning curve and really produce them efficiently. And that's where affordability comes from in that sort of cutter. Our fast response cutters, we just put number 31, 32 on contract last week. That's a total program record of 58. We just released the RFP for the remaining flight, cutters 33 through 58. That's on the street right now. That program is a firm fixed price contract. Part of better buying power is pick the right contract. It's firm fixed price from the very first ship. The lead ship was FFP. The results of that is we've delivered 12. We're getting ready to deliver the 13th. They're out there operating. Our change order budget is less than 1% on that contract. We started out, you assume about 10% antecedent liability on the contract, just like when you renovate your kitchen. You hold some money back for the unknown unknowns or the changes that are going to come up. With that firm fixed price contract, we've been able to manage our appetite for changes to only what actually has to happen. There's been some changes. We've found some problems. We've fixed them. But the total impact of that has been less than 1%. That's incredible on a new start, new design coming from the very first ship. That's affordability, and that's how you maintain affordability, and that's what's going to carry that program through the next 26 cutters. It's working very well. Our last piece is our offshore patrol cutter. And I'll give Ron a lot of credit for this, because he was kind of the architect of the acquisition strategy, but it's the poster child for better buying power. And every time I say that, the Navy folks roll their eyes and, oh, it's more acquisition reform, more overhead, more bureaucracy, more reports we have to do. Well, the best part about us with better buying power is it doesn't apply to us. It's DOD and we're DHS. So we don't have any reports to do. We don't have anything that says we have to use it. but we can look at it and go, okay, what parts really fit this program? And there's a lot of goodness in that program in Better Buying Power that is very applicable to the offshore patrol cutter. And we cranked all those items into the acquisition strategy from the very start. So the whole acquisition strategy, the whole program is designed around affordability as a central theme. And it's not schizophrenic. It's not like we want it here, we don't want it there, we want it here, we want it there. It's very consistent throughout the whole strategy, and it's playing out. Right now we've got a design competition going on where we've got a Tier 1 military yard, a large commercial yard, and a Tier 2 yard all competing for a fixed price contract to be the design and do the detailed design and then construct that cutter. Each contractor's got advantages and disadvantages. We're incentivizing producibility. We're not incentivizing technological content. We're not looking for state-of-the-art stuff. It's a state of the market. We've reduced a lot of the technical risk, but we're incentivizing producibility because when you're building 25 ships, that's what's going to lead to affordability. So the yard, they know, each team, we've got very qualified teams, they know what yard is going to build it, so they get to design the ship to be custom built in their yard. They know there's going to be a run of 25 at 2 per year, so they can really run down that learning curve and really get to production efficiency. And that's what's going to lead to affordability, and that's how we're going to be able to swing the OPC contract within this declining budget environment. And in the questions, we can go into more detail about OPC strategy, but the specifics of how it lays into Better Buying Power is really profound, and that it really hits all the main targets. Affordability is a requirement being the biggest one, and the industry engagement, which I'd like to talk more about, but I'll move on to our moderator. Thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and I think all of you will agree that's not bad for a pickup team, so thank you. What I'd like to do now is open the floor for questions. We have a couple of microphones. What I would ask is when you step to the microphone, please identify yourself, and if you have a question for a specific panel member, let us know, or just lob it over the transom, and we'll let the panel decide who jumps on it.
I'll get started and give other people a chance to get up, but Admiral Baffer, I'd like to hear more about the industry involvement. One of the things that we discussed at the Global Shipbuilding Executive Summit last year, one of the two top action items that came out of it that people saw as means to get to an affordable ship, the top one was requirements definition early on with industry involved in the requirements definition. And is that part of what you're talking about with industry involvement?
Yeah, good morning, Glenn. Absolutely. Typically what happens is we do requirements, we put everything, including the kitchen sink you want in there, we throw it over the wall to industry, and then the prices come back and we get sticker shock. And then we start trying to de-scope it. What we did with OPC is we structured a very structured industry engagement plan, and this was about a 3-year plan that is still going on now through the contract. So it was not only the pre-requirements phase, but it went all the way through. And we had to figure it out, think it through up front, because we're doing this within a competitive environment. And competition can stifle ideas and things like that, and it can also encourage them. We needed to make sure that we structured the industry engagement and the communication process to encourage those ideas and to make sure that we got all of industry's good ideas without without advantaging or disadvantaging any individual. So before we finished the requirements, we had what we call our preliminary award, our preliminary requirements. We put that out to industry, and we asked them, what does this mean cost-wise? And we got over 1,800 comments. The majority of them were specifically addressing cost. And we took a lot of those requirements, over 80% we actually incorporated into the final specification, the final RFP, before it went out on the street to address those costings. A lot of those items, we had to go back to the sponsor and say, hey, we told you this was expensive. Now we got industry telling you this is expensive. How badly do you want it? And so many of those things we were able to make decisions, with facts, not just anecdotes and not just, this is going to be expensive, we don't know. But we were able to go back and say, make those decisions with full knowledge of what it meant. Some things we kept because we really absolutely have to have it, and we're willing to pay for it. And then most of them were, okay, here's another way of doing it. So that was before we locked down the requirements. That was done. It was done in groups. It was done individually. It was everything in the RFP went out draft the industry before it got locked down, and we had the back and forth comment period. Even within the contract, we just finished. We called it our affordability seed roll, because we've got a commercial yard, a tier 1 yard, and a tier 2 yard in the mix. We didn't want to unduly hinder or unduly constrain somebody that has a way of doing it that may be different than what the MVR says. And our spec is not completely MVR. Our spec is basically half MVR, half steel vessel rules. It's kind of a hybrid, and which our industry partners are hybrids too, so it matches. But one of the things that we put out there was, as part of the preliminary design review, you come back with all the items that you think might save you money. What are things that we've got in here that are technically equivalent? And they came back with outstanding examples. And so then we went through, we confirmed that they were technically equivalent. We didn't change requirements, but it's another way of getting to the same requirement. You know, a civilian yard may do it differently than a military yard, and that's okay. We just want to make sure we're still going to get the same performance. And then we incorporated all those things in the contract. So the contractors that are competing right now, they can take it or they can leave it. It may work for their yard, it may not work for their yard. They can incorporate it into their design or not, but then we did a contract mod to put it in there. So now it's open to them to put those things in there. So, you know, we had the industry engagement initially. We drove it all the way through the down select. We've got the 3 yards competing, and we're finishing up our preliminary designs right now, and then we got that in there. It went down to the detail of, hey, we think you're putting too many water fountains on this ship. And we said, you're right, because NVR has big berthing areas spaced widely apart on larger ships. This is a smaller ship. It's got more individual berthing, and when you laid them out, we said, you're right, we got too many scuttlebutts. Let's find out another way to do that, and that's the level of detail we're working on right now, is reduce the number of water fountains on the ship, because, well, it's a water fountain, but then you've also got the plumbing, you've got the soil drains, you know, you got everything else that's associated with it. You add up all those nickels, multiply it by 25, and it's some real money after a while. So that's where we're at with affordability and industry engagement. But industry has done outstanding in helping us get to that point. They've just been outstanding partners all the way through, and that's a resource that we ignore at our peril, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Sean Walsh with Agility. This is for Admiral Baffert, maybe for Admiral Rabago if he wants to answer it too. The last couple of weeks, there's been several articles about the Coast Guard need for icebreakers. I think that's probably your Ohio replacement program in terms of a budget buster. But it's wondering now, that's a case of you got a limited number of ships. I've heard the requirements been set 3 heavy, 3 medium. So you got limited learning curve. I'm wondering, I know you've been doing studies. Are you thinking about it would seem to me affordability thinking is important for those, and have you already incorporated any of that in your studies or thinking about that?
Yeah, we've done a lot of thinking about icebreakers. And the problem with the icebreaker is just doesn't fit into the capital investment plan right now with OPCs. It's a lower priority to the Commandant than OPCs and getting the offshore capability. The things we've done with OPC for affordability are going to be much more difficult with an icebreaker, just because the lower number of ships, the industrial base. We haven't built an icebreaker, a heavy icebreaker in the U.S. since 1975. It's thicker steel. It's going to be more difficult. The acquisition strategy, though, we're thinking through that strategy and how can we make it as affordable as possible. And some of those strategies we're using on OPC aren't going to be available to us on the icebreaker. But the icebreaker is going to be a real acquisition challenge for us and how we do that. One of the things we're doing is we're working very closely with the Canadians and the Finns, because there's a small technological base of real ice-breaking experts in the world, and ice tanks and things like that. So we're trying to keep from recreating the wheel whenever we can. The Canadians have designed their Diffenbaker. We're looking very closely at that, because a lot of the same attributes that they have in theirs, we would need in ours as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
The only comment I'd make, and this is liberating to not be in the uniform, is the nation will get an icebreaker when there's a national will to add an icebreaker to our inventory. You compare that to Russia, who obviously sees the prospects of the importance of operating in those environments and is building, I think, 36 or something is their total. The world is moving into those places in the north and the south, and it's a question of national will. Does this nation want an icebreaker? Because the only heavy one that is owned by this nation today is 40 plus years old and is not going to last forever.
Thank you. We're here.
Morgan Parker from NAVC, and this question is addressed to Admiral Johnson and Mr. Lennon, but I'd welcome any input from the rest of the panel. Secretary Kendall mentioned competition as part of Better Buying Power 3.0, and it's from what we're hearing from the Coast Guard, it's been very successful for their programs. When you look at the nuclear yards, we have 2 nuclear builders, one of which exclusively builds carriers, and only 2 for submarines with varied capability. And so from an outsider's perspective looking in, the idea of real competition is seemingly a fallacy in that. And is that an incorrect statement is one part. And then the second part is, if it's somewhat correct, how do we simulate competition between the nuclear builders? And Secretary Kendall mentioned, you have a threat of competition from upstarts and something like that. Well, I don't see an upstart aircraft carrier builder coming around. So, what do we do? And I think the counterpoint to that is, if you have, rather than competition, but better cooperation between, the known builder or designer of something and the government, you can reduce costs that way. So, am I correct in my statements, or do you have a comment on that?
All right, good question. And I'll start off with that. I think the record speaks for itself on the Virginia class and how we've used a cooperative competition at the prime level. You have one prime electric boat, but you have 2 very capable shipbuilders between Electric Boat and HI and Newport News. And we've used that to not only have lessons learned and reduce costs throughout the build. Just look at the pricing we got on the Block 4 contract, ships 19 through 28. It has proven very effective to have that informal competition to drive down the cost. Both want to outdo each other, and the Navy expects that we're going to have a very aggressive learning curve and drive down the cost of those ships. At the sub-tier level, you look at the combat systems and many of the components, there is competition. We compete all the combat systems on that ship. If you look forward now to AHA replacement, what are we doing there? Well, we're trying to leverage the same infrastructure that we had built for Virginia as we go into AHA replacement. The government has invested significantly in both shipbuilders. How do we get the maximum benefit out of that? And obviously work between HII and Electric Boat to deliver those ships affordably. We're right in the middle of that. That's all part of our acquisition and build strategy work that we're working. We've just received an input from the shipbuilders, a collaborative input from both of them, and we are very focused on trying to get competitive-like pressures, like we did through the teaming agreement, into the AHA replacement. And one layer below the prime, we developed a competitive missile tube industrial base, a competitive electric drive industrial base through competition at the sub-level, and the combat systems, same as we use on Virginia's, will be pulled into this. So you have to be a little more granular when you look at what you mean by competition. You do competition where it makes sense. When we try to compete at the prime level, straight up, head-to-head, it was called Seawolf, and I'd posit, how'd that work out? So we definitely have matured our thinking and used the right levers, given the volume and the industrial base we have, to try to drive down our prices on our ships and get pretty darn good products in the process.
I would echo what Dave had said, and I think from Electric Boat perspective and my colleagues at Newport News, both of us can recite where we are with that informal competition, starting with a lead ship that took 86 and a half months and about 14.6 million man hours to drive down today, where we're at 62 months to deliver, heading towards 58. And at the end of Block 4 will be about 8 million hours. So there is definitely pride with the final assembly and test between the shipyards that keeps us going. But there's also a very collaborative relationship that drove us to get the cost down. And that was really, how do we get to 2 per year? And for years, that carrot kept moving away from both of us. So you, I think, are getting the best of both worlds, in that there is an informal competition because of the pride of each of the shipbuilders, but you're getting exceptional collaboration between the shipyards to drive the cost down to keep the two ships per year momentum. As Admiral Johnson said on Ohio replacement, there's a lot of new technology, and at every opportunity, we are using competition to drive the cost out of the component development and system development areas, which has been very effective to date.
Thank you. And, knowing where the schedule that we're still trying to re-wicker, I think we have time for one more question over here, please.
Morning, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Mark Smith, Ship Design Manager at NAVSEA. I absolutely agree that the operator is essential to getting their input, but how do you focus that? My experience is if you ask 5 chief engineers, you're going to get 7 different answers. And they'll all typically drive up the acquisition cost. So how do you deal with that in today's environment?
I'll just start from the submarine standpoint because that's a great question. And we back in the early 90s, think 1992, when we had 7 people in the then Centurion program office, we had to take on this. How do we get our hands around requirements, and how do you get agreement that those requirements are going to stick? And we worked very closely with the operators. We worked hard on the requirements. We got the right set. They signed. We agreed, and we didn't change them. And if you look at the operational requirements document, CDD in modern parlance, that has essentially not changed since 1994. How did we do that? We got it right up front, and we got people to commit. So when people come in later with pretty good ideas, you go back to, hey, no, this was agreed to by the submarine force as what we're going to do. The discipline in maintaining your requirement set is extremely important. Now, that isn't to say that you'd be myopic about it. The parts of the ship that you need to keep improving, combat systems, the weapons, the sensors, absolutely. We keep adjusting, and all you have to do is look at Virginia. As we redesigned the ship 11 and on, put big bow tubes, changed the sonar array. We're doing another change on the VPM, inserted into the ship's 29 and on. So you are adaptable, but you have to do it smartly and in a disciplined way.
Okay. I'm getting away from Mr. Ash. Any other questions? Because I know a couple of our panelists need to leave in a few minutes.
I just have one more question, I think, and then we probably should cut it off. But
You're not allowed to ask any questions. Sorry.
Several bites at the apple. One of the biggest drawbacks to getting our hands on an affordable program, from my point of view, maybe in the last decade, has been the fact that we have clung to a weight-based cost estimating tool. That to me has driven us away from changes to the ship, which might have led to more affordable ship. For instance, more room, more margins in certain areas, things that would allow us to have a lower total ownership cost. I've lost the bubble. I know that NAVSEA has been working. I'm not sure what the Coast Guard does for a cost estimating model. I know that NAVSEA has been working on a component-based cost estimating model, a more realistic one. Does anybody on the panel know where we stand on that?
All right, I will briefly answer that. I'm not O5C, the cost estimator, but obviously we've been through extensive cost estimates, 3 I noted for Ohio replacement, as well as updating the cost estimate for Virginia. And it's a very good question. Are you just straight taking weight-based estimates, and are you actually taking your cost estimating relationships based on ships that were built in a different environment and a different technology level? And we have taken that on. Our estimates are a lot more detailed. There are some weight-based elements, but we also put in factors of density, technology, era, to adjust for what would be a more relevant and realistic cost estimate. It's not perfect. I mean, there's disparities between the shipbuilders' cost estimators and the governments and even the program office, but we all work together and we all understand why we disagree and what we disagree. So I think that helps a much more, it gets to a better estimate in the end. We've come a long way since we cost estimated Virginia, and I think it's because of the estimates for things like CVNs, DDG 1000s, and Ohio replacements. We had to get better. We do live by the cost estimating curves, the S curves. We priced Virginia when we negotiated that block. We negotiated at a 40% probability of success factor, which is at about the right place. A little pressure, but we have taken that to, I'll say, a much better science than it was even a decade ago.
Glenn, just an observation. You use what you got unless you got something better. So when we were doing SSGN conversion, the Cape came in to review the cost estimates, and since a majority of it was in combat and fiber optic cable instead of copper, the cost-based cost estimating didn't work. So, but if you don't have anything else, you use what you got. So as we get further along and we have returns for more complicated systems with better design, then our tools will get better, and I think NAVSEA 05 has taken that into consideration. And the rest of the world, because as Dave said, everyone else has their own group that, you know, I don't believe your number, my number's better. Well, if you collaborate and understand what the base is in, then you have a better opportunity to get to a more consistent number.
We use 05C as well. We don't have a large in-house cost estimating group, and I agree exactly what Dave said with them. They've been great partners for us. Early on, basically weight is what you've got, and as that design matures, they continue to refine the model to be specific to the design that you have. And as that model gets refined, it gets closer and closer, and you know that S-curve gets a little tighter. But you got to go with what you got at the time that you have it, because you got to put the budget numbers in way beyond, you know, before you actually have good design data.
Okay, thank you. And in keeping with one of the tenets of this year's ASNE Day, flexibility, I want to thank my panel members for joining us, and a donation will be made on your behalf to the Wounded Warrior Project for your participation. And thank you to all of you.